أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن
الحمد لله رب العالمين،
الرحيم.
والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. أما بعد، فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. The section or the chapter which I'm going to look at in this week's lesson is the fourth chapter of Shamaa Tirmizi, which in Arabic is entitled Babu Ma Ja'a Fi Tarajjuli Rasulillahi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, which in English means the chapter concerning the combing of the hair of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Now, before we look at the hadith in a bit more detail, just very briefly, what we can derive and gather from this particular chapter is the importance which Islam lays down regarding one's external appearance. And I mentioned this particular point before, that many people think or assume that wearing scruffy clothing, wearing disheveled clothing, wearing dirty clothing, having your hair all over the place is a sign of a great person, is a sign that this person is religious, this person has a lot of taqwa and has a lot of piety. However, that is far away from the truth, because piety and taqwa and religiousness is something which has got to do with the heart. That it depends on your heart whether you are pious or whether you are religious. And it doesn't depend on the way you are dressed, and it doesn't depend on whether your clothes are dirty or whether your clothes are messy or not dirty. In a very famous hadith of Sahih Muslim, narrated by Sayyidina Abu Hurairah anhu, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment will not look at a person's external features, he will not look at a person's beauty, he will not look at whether this person is very beautiful, whether he is handsome, whether this particular woman is pretty or beautiful, but instead Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will look at your heart. So what we can gather is that when it comes to ibadat, when it comes to actions, when it comes to labeling a person to be pious or a person to have a lot of taqwa, and to label a person whether he is muttaqi or not, it depends on a person's heart, it depends on his internal purification and his rectification, and it's got nothing to do with a person's external appearance. And this is why it's mentioned in another hadith which can be found in Sunnah Abu Dawood, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, "Man kana lahu sha'run falyukrimhu," which means that whoever has hair, he should look after it. In another hadith, once Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saw a person whose hair was disheveled, whose hair was all over the place. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam remarked that, does he not find such a thing, i.e. oil or a comb, by which he can gather or straighten his hair? Meaning that this person, his hair was all over the place. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then pointed out that, can't he afford some oil? Doesn't he have a comb at home so that he can use it to straighten and put his hair neatly and put his hair together? In another hadith, once Sayyidina Abu Qatada anhu asked Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that I have long hair, should I comb it? So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam replied by saying yes, and he said, look after your hair. And he then goes on to say that Abu Qatada radiallahu anhu, acting upon this particular order from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, i.e. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam telling him to comb his hair and to look after his hair, that Sayyiduna Abu Qatada radiallahu anhu, not only would he comb his hair or apply oil to his hair once a day, but instead he will do it twice a day. Why? Because it was the clear and a sarih order from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So what we can gather from the 2 or 3 hadiths which I have mentioned is quite clearly that it is the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It is a teaching of Islam, the importance which Islam puts on hygiene, on cleanliness, and also on your external appearance. Now, the first hadith which we are going to look at is a very famous hadith, and this hadith has been narrated by Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha, and she says, "Kuntu urajjilu ra'sa Rasulillahi sallallahu alaihi wasallam wa ana ha'idu." That I would comb the hair of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam whilst I would be in the state of menstruation. So what this hadith is telling us is that Sayyidah Aisha anha, whilst she would be in her menstruation cycle, she would comb the blessed hair of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now from this particular hadith, we can derive a few points and a few rulings and a few masails. The first ruling or the first point which we can derive is, number one, the significance or the importance of combing one's hair, or the importance or the significance of one's external appearance. Because when we look at this particular hadith, what it's trying to say is that sometimes when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was busy and he could not keep his hair tidy, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not have time to comb his hair, then what would happen is that Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha would comb Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's hair. So what we can derive or understand is that if the husband or the person himself, if he can't comb the hair, then he should let his wife or his daughter or someone comb it for him, so that he can maintain that external appearance and that external cleanliness and hygiene. So that's the first point which we can derive from this hadith. The second point which we can derive from this particular hadith is that it is a moral obligation, and according to certain scholars, a religious obligation for the wife to serve her husband, for the wife to do the khidmat of her husband. And this is quite clearly established from this particular hadith, where it says that Sayyidah Aisha anha would comb the hair of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There is a hadith which can be found in Sunan Abu Dawud under the section regarding miswak, where Sayyidah Aisha anha again narrates that sometimes Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would tell her to pass the miswak. So what she would do is that she would get hold of the miswak, she would chew the miswak, she would sometimes wet the miswak, and then she would give it to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There's also another hadith again which can be found in Sunan Abu Dawud, that when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was about to pass away, he gestured to Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha to give him or to pass him the miswak. So Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha passed the miswak to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did the miswak and he passed away in that particular state. So from these two ahadith, quite clearly it explains and it mentions that Sayyidah Aisha anha would pass the miswak to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, would do khidmah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and would serve Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Another famous hadith which can be found in many of the books of hadith regarding Sayyidah Fatima radiallahu anha, that once she came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and she complained that she was doing a lot of household chores for Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, and she had to do a lot of work, and the household chores were tiring Sayyidah Fatima radiallahu anha. So she then requested Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to buy for her or to give her a slave girl who can assist her in the household chores. Now Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, instead of buying a slave girl for her, instead of giving her a slave girl, what he did was that he taught Sayyidah Fatima radiallahu anha to say 33 times Subhanallah, 33 times Alhamdulillah, and 34 times Allahu Akbar after each salah, and that will take away the tiredness from the household chores she would do every day for Sayyiduna Ali radiallahu anhu. And again, from that particular hadith, what we can derive is that if this was something wrong, that the wife not doing khidmah or serving the husband, that if this was something wrong or if this was something impermissible, then as soon as Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam heard that Sayyidah Fatima radiallahu anha was going through so much difficulty in doing the household chores for Sayyidina Ali, what would have Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam have done? He would have gone straight to Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, or he would have called Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, and he would have said to him that, don't let my daughter do the household chores, you do it yourself, find someone else to do it. But Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not say that, did not do that. But instead he told Sayyidah Fatima radiallahu anha that you don't have to complain, there's no need to complain to Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu. I am not going to make a big issue from it, but I'm not going to give you a slave girl, I'm not going to give you someone to assist you in the household chores. But instead Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught her to say the tasbih, to say the tahleed, to say the takbir after each salah, and that will take away the difficulty she was going through, that will take away the hardship and the pain she was going through when doing the household chores of Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu. So that is the second ruling, or the second point which we can derive from this particular hadith. The third point which I want to establish from this particular hadith is that a woman who's in her menstruation cycle, her body is not impure, but instead her body and her outer body is bark and pure. That a woman who's in a menstruation cycle, it's only her internally she is impure, hence she's not allowed to pray salah, she's not allowed to recite the Holy Quran, she's not allowed to touch the Holy Quran. But in terms of her outer body or of her external body, then that in itself is pure, that in itself is bark. So if a woman is in a menstruation cycle, then if the husband was to touch her hand, if the husband was to touch her body, then it doesn't mean that the husband's hand or the husband's body has become impure, he has to wash that off. It doesn't mean that. And this is again quite clearly established or mentioned from the hadith that Sayyidah Aisha anha would be in a menstruation cycle, but even then she would comb the hair of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now I'm going to take this opportunity and explain or mention some rulings with regards to women who are in their menstruation cycle, that what they are allowed to do and what they are not allowed to do, or what women in that particular state can do or cannot do. So I'm going to mention a few rulings with regards to women who are in their menstruation cycle. Now the first ruling which I'm going to mention is that a woman who's in a menstruation cycle, she is not allowed to recite any verses from the Holy Quran. So a woman who's in a period, totally impermissible for her to recite any verses from the Holy Quran. And this is quite clearly mentioned in a hadith which can be found in Sunan al-Tirmidhi, narrated by Sayyiduna Ibn Umar anhu, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that a ha'id, i.e. a woman who is in a menstruation cycle, and a person who is in need of a bath, meaning a man who is in need, we could also be a woman as well, who are in the state of hadath akbar, i.e. they've released, say, semen, or what we call in Arabic mani, or they just had sexual intercourse with their wife. So the state which they are now in Arabic, you call them, or you call that state hadath akbar. So a man who's in that particular state, for them to recite any verses of the Holy Quran is totally impermissible. So the hadith says that a ha'id and a person in need of a bath must not recite anything from the Holy Quran. So that is the first ruling, that a woman who is in a period is not allowed to recite verses from the Holy Quran. Now this takes me on to another contemporary issue, and that is that, just say if a woman who's in a menstruation cycle and she happens to be a hafiza, someone who has memorized the Holy Quran. Now, how would this woman go about in reciting the Holy Quran? Because there may be, or the situation could be such like, there may be a woman who's in a menstruation cycle. Now, if she is going to take, say, 8 to 10 days, or as you know, the maximum is 10 days a woman will be in a period for. So every month, if 10 days are going to be for her periods, she may not be able to, she's not allowed to recite the Holy Quran. So what could happen is that it may cause her to forget certain verses of the Holy Quran. So in that situation, is there some kind of flexibility? Is there some kind of wus'ah? And the same ruling also applies, say, for example, a woman or a female teacher, when she's teaching children, again, if she's in a period, then what would she do? How would she go about in teaching the kids and the students, say, Quran, and so on and so forth? Now, the scholars have said that what we can derive from the hadith is that it is prohibited and impermissible for a woman in the state of menstruation to recite a verse of the Holy Quran, qira'atu ayatin. Hence, if a woman in that particular state recited verses from the Holy Quran, but word by word. So just say, for example, if she was reciting Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, so she can't recite all that because that's going to be reciting a verse of the Holy Quran which is unlawful. However, if she was to recite word for word or word by word, i.e. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, and she was to recite it in that particular way or teach the kids in that particular way, then that would be allowed and that would be permissible. So that is the first ruling. The second ruling which I want to mention is that a woman who is in a menstruation cycle is not allowed to perform tawaf. And the reason why she's not allowed to perform tawaf is because the place where we do tawaf around is a masjid, the Baytullah, it's a masjid. So as we will look at later, that women in their menstruation cycle are not allowed to enter the masjid, hence a woman who's in that particular state is not allowed to perform tawaf. And the hadith regarding this particular ruling is a hadith which can be found in Sahih al-Bukhari, that when Sayyidah Aisha anha came to Makkah for the farewell Hajj, she was in the state of menstruation. So she said to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that she's in the state of menstruation, she is unable to perform the rituals of Hajj. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam informed her that do what the pilgrims do apart from tawaf, which should be done when you become purified. So what we can gather from this particular hadith is that if a woman is in her menstruation cycle and she's gone for Hajj, so what she can do, she can have a bath, she can put on her ihram, She can put on the two garments. She can make the intention for the Hajj she's planning to do. It could be Hajj Tamattu, Qiran. It could be Hajj Ifrad. And then she will recite the Talbiyah, various zikr, tasbih, tahleel. She'll be able to do that. She could even go to Arafah. She can even go to Muzdalifah. She can go to Mina. She can pelt the jamarat, pelting the shayateen. She'll be allowed to do that. But what she can't do is that she can't do tawaf around the Baytullah. And also, she can also do sa'i, by the way, i.e. the running between Mount Safa and Mount Marwa in the state of menstruation. That is allowed. It's mentioned in the books of hadith. In particular, Imam Hanif rahimullah is of the view that tahara or cleanliness isn't a condition, isn't a prerequisite when it comes to do the sa'i, i.e. the running from Mount Safa to Mount Marwa. So therefore, a woman, just say for example, if she just did her tawaf and she was clean and she was purified, and then after she did the tawaf, when she was just about to start her sa'i from Safa to Marwa, she realizes that she's now bleeding, she's in the state of menstruation. So in that particular state, for her to perform the sa'i, that would be correct, that would be valid. And her sa'i, which is obligatory and wajib after the first tawaf, after the compulsory tawaf, such as tawaf-i-umrah, tawaf-i-ziyarah, then her sa'i will be considered valid and will be considered accepted. So that is the second ruling. The third ruling here is that a woman who is in a menstruation cycle is not allowed to enter a masjid. Now, I've explained this before, that masjid here does not mean masjid in terms of a building, but masjid here means an Islamic Shari'i masjid, a masjid defined by Islamic law to be a masjid. And as I mentioned before, that is basically that area where the trustees of the masjid or the bani of the masjid has stipulated that this area is going to be for prayer, and generally speaking that tends to be the Jamaat Khana, the prayer hall. And then when that prayer hall or that area becomes masjid, then automatically the area above and the area below, ma fawq and ma taht, also becomes a masjid as well, unless the trustees at the time or at the making of the intention, they excluded the area above or they excluded the area below to be a masjid. That's different. But if they didn't exclude it, then automatically the area above the prayer hall or the area below the prayer hall, that would be considered as a Shari'i masjid, and a woman would not be allowed to enter those places. However, if there is like a separate musalla or a separate kind of prayer room or a separate room for women to attend or to come and sit down like it is when it comes to talks and conferences and so on, then in that situation they will be allowed to sit in those places. Why? Because that particular place or that particular prayer room is not considered to be a Shari'i masjid, is not considered to be Islamic speaking, according to the Islamic Sharia law, to be a prayer room, to be a Jamaat Khana, but instead it just tends to be like a musalla, a temporary prayer room, or just a normal room for sisters and for women. They will be allowed to enter that particular room in the state of menstruation. So that is the third ruling. The fourth ruling here is that a woman who is in a menstruation is not allowed to fast or pray. So in that particular state, she's not allowed to pray namaz, she's not allowed to pray salah, she's not allowed to fast. However, she will do qadha of her fasts when she becomes pak and pure. However, there is no need for her to do qadha of the prayers. So that is the fourth ruling. The fifth ruling is that a woman who's in a menstruation cycle is not allowed to engage herself in sexual intercourse. So basically, her husband cannot have intercourse with her in that particular state. The sixth ruling is that, however, a woman who's in a menstruation cycle is allowed to engage in foreplay with her husband. That she's allowed to engage in mula'aba and foreplay in her husband. Now, the way this particular mula'aba or foreplay will work is that the area between the woman's navel and the knees. So the area between the woman's navel and the knees. Any direct contact in that particular area. And what I mean by direct contact here, I mean skin to skin contact in that particular area, that is impermissible. However, if it is indirect contact, such as that particular area is covered with a sheet of cloth or with a blanket or something where the man or the husband cannot feel the warmth of his wife's skin in that particular area, then indirect contact or indirect benefit or foreplay in terms of kissing that particular area. However, the area which is above the navel and below the knees, then it is permissible to have direct contact with that particular area. So a husband, if he wants, he can kiss that particular area, he can touch that particular area when his wife is in the state of menstruation. So that is the sixth ruling. And the seventh ruling here is that it is permissible for a woman experiencing postnatal bleeding or even menstruation bleeding to hold dua books which have verses of the Holy Quran inside them, and also it is permissible for them to recite verses of the Holy Quran with the intention of dua and supplication, and not with the intention of reciting the Holy Quran. What I mean by that is that there are certain du'as in the Holy Quran, such as Rabbana atina fid dunya hasana wa fil akhirati hasanatan wa qina azaban nar. They are also used for du'as and supplications. So therefore, in that situation, the woman who is in the state of menstruation, she can recite those verses, but it has to be done with the intention of dua and not with the intention of recitation. So that is the seventh ruling. The eighth ruling which I want to mention is that a woman who is in a menstruation cycle, and also a man who is in need of a bath, who is in hadath akbar, it is not permissible for them to cut their hair or to remove unwanted hair in that particular state. Very important ruling. Many people are unaware of this, and that is that when a man is in the state of janaba, so he can't remove unwanted hair, say hair below his armpit, hair below his navel, unless he goes and washes or pours water over his body, and thereafterwards hair from his armpit and his navel, he will be allowed to remove that. But unless he does that, then he won't be able to remove the hair in that particular state. And the main reason why is because when that person is in that particular state, or a woman who's in her period, that area of the body, every single strand of their hair is impure. Hence, it is not permissible for them to remove unwanted hair in that particular state. So that is the first hadith regarding this particular chapter. The second hadith regarding this chapter concerning the hair of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a hadith which can be found, which is narrated by Sayyiduna Anas bin Malik radhiyallahu anhu, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam often rubbed oil in his head and also often combed his beard, and he would put a cloth over his head which became like an oilcloth due to the frequent use of oil. Now, what we can gather from this particular hadith is that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he would put oil over his head, but also at the same time, above his hair, or above his head, or on his head, he would put a cloth and then he would put his topi or his hat. And the main reason he would do that is so that the oil, instead of getting stuck onto the hat and causing a foul smell and causing the hat to be stained, the cloth which is on top of the hair will absorb the oil, will absorb the grease, hence the oil and the grease will go onto the cloth and not onto the hat and not onto the topi. So this is a practice of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The third hadith, which is mentioned in this chapter, hadith narrated by Sayyidah Aisha anha, where she narrates that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would like to begin with the right while combing his hair, and also whilst performing wudu, and when putting on his shoes or his sandals. And the meaning of this particular hadith is that those things which reflect dignity or elegance, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would start with the right hand side. So like for example, when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would enter the masjid, he would enter with the right foot. When Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would leave the toilet, he would leave with the right foot. When Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would eat, he would eat with his right foot. Why? Because these things got to do with elegance, these things got to do with dignity, and so on and so forth. However, those things which are contrary to that, i.e. those things which does not reflect dignity and greatness, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would start from the left hand side. So for example, when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would enter the toilet, he would enter with his left foot. When Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would do istinja, he would use his left hand. When Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would clean his nose for wudu, he would use the little finger on his left hand. When Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would do khilal between his toes, then he would again use the little finger on his left hand to do the khilal between his toes. Why? Because these things does not reflect elegance and does not reflect dignity or greatness. Now, regarding this particular hadith, there isn't any report or there aren't any ahadith which tells us how the oil was applied on his hair by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. How did he exactly apply the oil? How did he exactly comb his hair? But what we can gather from a hadith which Imam Suyuti rahimahullah has mentioned in his Jami' al-Saghir, that when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would oil his hair, what he would firstly do is that he would put the oil in his right palm, and then he would firstly put oil on his eyebrows, then he would put oil on his eyelashes, and then finally he would put oil over his head. And the reason why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would put oil on his eyebrows first is because it's mentioned again in another hadith of Jami' al-Saghir that by putting oil over your eyebrows, it takes away headaches. So because of this reason, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would put oil over his eyebrows firstly, then afterwards on his eyes and over the eyelashes, and then finally Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would put oil over his head. And I said before that there isn't a hadith where it says how exactly Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would put the oil, but what we can derive from the hadith which we just narrated is that you should start on the right hand side, so oil the right hand side of your head first, then the left, so that you can act upon the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The fourth hadith of this particular chapter is a hadith narrated by Abdullah bin Mughaffal radiyallahu anhu, and the words of the hadith are that قال نهى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم عن الترجل إلا غبا, which means that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam prohibited the combing of the hair but allowed it occasionally. And the final hadith of this chapter which is hadith number 5, very similar to hadith number 4. That's why I'm going to mention them together, and then the commentary will be given together as well. That Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam kana yatarajjalu ghibban. That Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would comb his hair occasionally. Now, the last two hadiths of this particular chapter tells us that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would tell the companions and would order the companions to comb their hair occasionally or sometimes. However, the hadith which I mentioned right at the beginning of the dars or of the lesson of Sayyidina Abu Qatada radhiyallahu anhu, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam telling him to comb his hair, and because of the order of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he would comb his hair twice a day. Now, this leads to a contradiction in the hadith, because the hadith I mentioned above regarding Sayyidina Abu Qatada radhiyallahu anhu, that is indicating that one should comb his hair every day, and Abu Qatada radhiyallahu anhu went one step further and he did it twice a day. Whereas this hadith here is telling us that no, you shouldn't do it every day, but you should do it, every few days, but it should not be done every day. Now, the true meaning of the hadith which I've just narrated to you now is telling us that we should not go overboard, or we should not go extreme when it comes to combing our hair. What I mean by that is that some youngsters in particular, what happens is that they take hours when it comes to combing the hair. They will apply some gel, they will apply this particular, conditioner, they will comb their hair, they will do this style, they will do that style, so on and so forth. They take hours and hours. So what's this hadith Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that you should comb your hair every few days is trying to say that you shouldn't be too or go over the top or extreme when it comes to combing the hair. Comb the hair, but you can do it every day, but it shouldn't be like go over the top. Just like getting a comb and just like combing it, just brushing it here and there, that is sufficient. As long as it is neat and tidy and it maintains hygiene and appearance and cleanliness, that is sufficient. There's no need for you to go over the top. So that is the true interpretation of this hadith, where it says that you should comb your hair occasionally. It means that don't go over the top when it comes to combing the hair, but instead if you do it every day, that is also allowed and permissible as well, but just doing a couple of brushes here and there, that would be sufficient, and there's no need for you to go extreme or to go beyond or to put too much hardship when it comes to combing the hair. We just leave it there for this week. May Allah give us the tawfiq to act on as we said. Wa akhiru da'wan alhamdulillah rabbil alamin.